Well, I think these are important issues for us as we think through our response to urbanisation. Cities that are both full of potential, the cradle of civilization and democracy and arts and civilization, and cities that are full of abuse when there isn't a rule of law and there is open corruption and power. My own experience was coming back into Australia after studying overseas, setting up a legal practice in the city of St Kilda, working with people who couldn't afford legal services, discovering that most of their problems were driven by political issues, not legal issues. What had happened in St Kilda, which was typical of inner cities, waves of migrants come through and then they become wealthy enough and they buy in the middle class outer suburbs. Suddenly people had said, what are we doing this for? The inner suburbs are right next to the city where we work. St Kilda's on a bay, and they started to buy up the inner city workmen's cottages, rip out the briquette heaters, put in central heating, heritage colours, tripling rents, tripling house prices, and generations of poor people who had lived in St Kilda, whose kids couldn't afford a holiday bed, at least they could have access to the beach, were now being forced to the outskirts of Melbourne, where there wasn't public transport. And there wasn't even Luna Park, which we had in St Kilda, or a beach. And so my own journey was to actually run for council and get elected on a platform of putting ratepayers' dollars into affordable housing for long-term St Kilda poor. We were the first council anywhere in Australia to do this. Federal and state governments looked after housing. It wasn't our local council responsibility. My argument was very simple with St Kilda residents. I said, do we want to all be like Carlton? St Kilda people hate Carlton. In Carlton, everyone wears a Rolex watch and now drives a BMW, totally gentrified, urbanised. I said, don't we actually like a heterogeneous mix? The fact that there are boarding houses and some street people, and that you can go down to Ackland Street, St Kilda, dressed up to shop, or with your dressing gown on and a cigarette out of your mouth, and nobody looks twice because it's an accepting area. A cultural argument actually saw me and others get elected to the St Kilda Council, and in that first year put $15 million of ratepayers' dollars into affordable housing, saying that cities that are heterogeneous actually are what make them vibrant. It's what is so extraordinary about the film Slumdog Millionaire. I suspect Madhu, you and Indians don't necessarily like the film, but I think for those of us who watched it, there was this extraordinary sense of vibrancy and aliveness and community. It reminded me actually of a documentary I saw where some slum dwellers from India were taken to Britain, and they were shocked about the isolation, the lack of community, the loneliness, the spiritual poverty. As they were being interviewed on the documentary, they said, we have to help these poor people. This is desperate. They actually have no sense of what life could be. Well, the images, negative and positive, are images that jar in our heads around cities, and thinking them through is pretty important. What we know is that the rule of law, the politics of inclusion, the argument that government actually exists as a collective representation of people. It should be the best of us acting collectively that doesn't therefore institutionalise injustice, as we've been hearing, becomes an urgent political task, indeed a global task. Rather than take up the time, and I think you've got a lot of questions you'd like to ask of people, let me just say that World Vision has been moving its base, which has been a traditional rural development base, which is a lot easier to organise for child sponsorship because you put the child sponsorship dollars together in an area which is 30,000 to 150,000. It might be a series of villages in a valley. And over 15 years, World Vision only stays in an area 15 years, you bring together programs with agreement with the community that will allow them over 15 years to move to sustainability, empowerment. Programs, as you agree with them, that might be schools and health clinics and microfinance and businesses, HIV/AIDS education, all of those programs. And given that it's a rural area, whilst you might lose some people to the cities, you can track the children who are sponsored. Of course, the non-sponsored kids go to school, and the health clinics, it's for the whole community. Once, of course, you move to an urban area, it's very difficult to do child sponsorship. People move and they're shifted out, and working with a community which isn't naturally villages in a valley and natural community leadership becomes much trickier. Now, 30% of our World Vision programming is located in urban cities, having to adapt the model. It's based on principles that urban poor are not victims, they're resilient people. You've just been hearing about the extraordinary resilience of vendors and the rickshaw drivers. That organic community organisation is difficult but still possible in urban areas, though there is sometimes fragmentation and people get lost. That it is fundamentally important to move from simply programming to advocacy, building alliances, bringing together collaboration so that disadvantaged urban groups do the political job, are empowered, can speak, as we've been hearing from Matu, challenge in the Supreme Court's laws that are unjust, name corruption. Of course, it means working in advocacy with local governments, with the private sector, with community groups, focusing, given its World Vision and we're a child wellbeing organisation, on children's wellbeing, asking the question of how these power structures serve children. Asking very simply in urban areas, and we've got all sorts of complex programming modelling developed over 50 years of development, but asking very simply, children, have you eaten today? Have you been involved in some of the street theatre workshops talking about your plight, dramatising it, expressing it, having a voice? Recognising, as we've heard, that the cities are areas to which more and more of the poor will flow, driven by climate change, driven by the loss of arable land, driven by population growth. The hope is that we can work for better governance, for responsible citizenry. And let me finish by saying, work in advocacy by saying in any program that where we're offering inputs, finances, skills, to say to the community, who should build this school or this health clinic? They'll always say it should be our government. Well, why do you need World Vision? And I'll say, well, who knows where government monies have gone. Well, the deal is we build this with you on one condition. You actually allow us to find out what your government promised in the education budget for schools, track where that money went, and be organised to raise your voice to actually demand better, grassroots, demand-driven governance. This is all part of the challenge of urbanisation. Thank you.